Hello, everyone. Hello to all of you stoners and potheads and weed freaks and whatever nickname you like to call yourself. Welcome to another episode of When I'm High. But, you know, as you probably know, if you've been listening to this podcast, this is not about when I'm high. This is about my subjects. There, you heard her laughing. My new subject this week is Mindy. Mindy is the host of a podcast which I am very involved with, and I'm just going to let her go ahead and introduce herself and say what she does.
Sure. Hi, Spencer. I'm the co-host of the podcast Horse Talk Horror with Sharon, my cohort, who is also a cohort of Spencer's. And Spencer's our fearless producer on that show. I'm also a medical marijuana user and a breast cancer survivor for whom the medical marijuana process was fairly integral. So glad to be here to talk about it. I think that's what I have to say. I don't know. Is that good?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, cool.
And I think that, you know, just because I know this, I can say that your cannabis use actually starts before the medical side of things.
Yeah.
Which, you know what? Let's just get right into that. Go ahead and tell me the first time you tried cannabis, if you remember. Oh, and actually, this is a question I think I want to start asking people: is what nickname do you like to call it? Cannabis, pot, weed? What do you prefer?
Well, a friend of mine who will remain unnamed, we refer to it as Skittles, but that's just us. Yeah, I don't really know that I had another nickname up until you mentioned that. So
I'm sure one of them you end up using more than you realize, but you know it's just unconscious at this point. So we'll probably use all the different words that come up: cannabis, weed, pot. But anyway, the question was, can you tell me the first time you tried it, and then if you remember, and then if it wasn't the first time that it actually got you high, tell me about that time as well.
Yeah, the first time, all I remember is that it did not get me high. But I'm pretty sure the time it did was when I was driving with some friends from high school. We had recently graduated, and we were driving in what now is a built-up suburb, but at the time was like kind of like country area. And it was totally dark, and it was really late at night, and it was like the four of us in our friend's car, and I started freaking out because I was like, we're trapped in a horror movie, you guys. Like we're the unsuspecting teens that have just smoked pot, and now we're totally gonna get murdered at the gas station. Like, I was convinced. And then my friend was like, so I think you're high. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess I am.
You said that you had just graduated high school?
Well, yeah, like maybe the year before. So not like just, but like we were somewhat recently out, I think maybe. I'm not really sure, actually. Senior year, maybe.
Yeah, that's the perfect age for kids in horror movies smoking pot and having sex, and you know that you're going to get murdered by the serial killer at that point.
Oh, totally. No, that's exactly what was going through my mind, because we did have to stop at a gas station, and it was out in the middle of nowhere, and I was kind of freaking out. And honestly, after that, I kind of noticed I had always had really weird medical issues, specifically. For all you ladies out there, I had really bad cramps, and like really bad, and kind of recognized early on that this was actually somewhat helpful in that regard, that pot was really helpful for like any sort of pain or discomfort or just depression even. And so kind of early on, I think I recognized like this would be really helpful for those things. And I actually used weed long before medical marijuana was a thing, for that very purpose, actually, which kind of continued into adulthood and was in a way quite helpful as I got older. And then I finally got to a point where I didn't necessarily need it for cramps anymore, but it became helpful for other things. So that was kind of and like legally accepted as such, which was really exciting. But up until that point, it hadn't really been at that level. It was still looked at as, you know, totally illegal. And it was like, you know, the gateway drug and all that crazy shit you would hear. And I was just like, well, it makes my life easier and it makes this part of life that's normally unbearable much more easier to deal with. So I'm fine with it. I'm down.
Yeah, that's really cool that you from not even hearing it about from anywhere, that you just figured that out on your own. Was it that it would lessen the pain of the cramps?
Yeah. And I mean, obviously you're in a bad mood and you're upset. So anything to help with that is welcome. And I mean, that some days was huge, having, being able to like kind of get high and like feel happy about something when you were not feeling well. So yeah, I was kind of both, like the mood effects and the pain relief, which was really awesome.
And yeah, regarding the mood specifically, I was going to ask that obviously your mood is going to be heightened from it anyway, but it's also going to be heightened because you're feeling less pain.
Right.
I guess were there any other effects that you noticed from cannabis helping you in a medical way?
I don't know back then that was the case. Some anxiety, but I didn't like. Now it's hard to separate and to remember, obviously, like that long ago. Not that I'm ancient, but like I've just had a lot happen since then, where I now think of it in terms of, well, it would depend on if I had a sativa or an indica, but like I didn't know that shit when I was like 19. Like I didn't care, So
right.
Nobody really did. So now it's just a different animal, I think, and I think about it in a much different way. So I'm trying to remember what it was like back then, but for the most part, it did help with anxiety, or at least gave me something else to focus on, or let another emotion sort of take precedent over whatever you were going through. If you like weren't feeling good, or like there were many times where I would be feeling nauseous, and that would help help me eat in general, which I know is something that I encountered a lot later and more prevalent, like when I was going through chemotherapy. But like back in the day, like there were times where you just would not feel good and you just did not want to eat anything, but you really hadn't had anything to eat all day. And, weed was really helpful in that regard. Granted, I kind of wanted like Taco Bell and chocolate as opposed to like, healthy foods. But hey, sometimes you got to take what you can get.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. When you think about just getting high in general, is there a specific story from your past that sort of jumps out at you as being a funny or interesting story?
Well, yeah. I have one memory that is involves two friends of mine from high school that I'm still friends with today that we all, I think, sort of laugh at, but we were new at trying marijuana, and we were maybe 19 years old, and we were very, very high, and came back to my parents' house and made popcorn in the microwave. I was still living with my parents at the time. They were asleep. They had no idea any of this was happening, and we made microwave popcorn, and then basically got it out of the microwave and into the bowl, but that was about as far as we got, because we all sort of just like hovered around the bowl, standing in the kitchen in front of the microwave, just like just like eating out of the bowl, like right there. It was kind of funny, and to this day we still sort of joke about it between us, because it was just really funny. Like we never really made it to the living room to watch TV like we had planned. We kind of just ate it all right there. So yeah,
this was not a civilized eating of popcorn on a couch.
No,
right,
not
right.
at all. Not at all. No.
I love those stories that revolve around food, which we will be talking more about in a bit. So do you have a preferred method of intake? Maybe that's changed over the years?
I think it has. I used to not be picky. Whereas now, well, I'm still kind of not picky. No, I'm just kidding. But I am a fan of edibles. I have a dispensary near me now that makes the most amazing stuff that is utterly delicious. And I've gotten in trouble more than once because I've forgotten that they were edibles that were, special edibles, and was like, this is delicious. And then was like, oh boy.
It's not just candy.
I'm really glad I don't have anything to do today. So there's that, but I use vaporizers more than I do like joints or like straight up smoking, which I never really thought much of, I think, when I was younger. But I use vape cartridges, and then I have a mini vaporizer as well that I charge up, and I can grind if I have flour, I can grind it down and use it in a vaporizer, which I tend to like more than I do regular smoking. But so that, I guess if I had to choose, that would be preferred, like edibles or vaporizing. But
Yeah.
again, it depends on the situation. I'm not always picky. So
Sure. A method of intake is a method of intake. I mean, obviously, smoking is something that we're seeing a lot less these days because it is clearly not good for your lungs.
Right.
Yeah, and now, these days there's a lot more other ways that you can get it into your system, which is great. So, but you do still smoke sometimes?
I do sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have a friend who found this method of getting like the oil, I guess you can buy at dispensaries, and then he injects it into food or into other used cartridges or something. I don't know. Like I was just hearing about this a few days ago. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, all the different ways that they have available now that you can ingest, I guess.
It really is crazy. I mean, yeah, there's like balms and the oils and tinctures and all that stuff.
But those are my preferably.
Nice. Let's see. So how often would you say that you partake? And again, this is probably something that has changed over the years.
Yeah, but it depends on the day. I mean, at least a few times a week, I would say, depending on the week. If I'm having a rough week, there are some times where if I have a few strains that I'll get that are good for stress relief, and it's like after work, instead of a glass of wine, like I'll have that instead. So it kind of really depends on what's going on. But I always have stuff on hand, just because it's sort of like having Advil in the house for me. Like I kind of feel like I want to have that, and I'll have a variety on hand. Like there's a strain that I love called White Harmony that I have a vape version of and a flower version of right now that I use sparingly because it's amazing for muscle pains and sore joints and stuff like that. And it's great for stress. But so I don't want to ever really like not have that in the house. But it's not always available. So I try to be sparing with it. But like there's some other stuff that's more sativa-esque, that's more, helps you be alert or creative or whatever. And those I tend to be a little bit more sparing with, depending, just because, it's not my special Advil, awesome, keep on hand stuff.
Right.
But yeah, I use I'd say a few times a week for sure. Some people, like I said, some people drink wine after work or whatever. It depends on the day, but sometimes I'll be like, you know what? I need a little White Harmony to take the edge off. So.
And specifically with the White Harmony, you said that you have it in a vape and flower.
Yeah.
Do you notice any difference in the way that it affects you between those two?
I've been trying to pay attention, honestly, because I did it because of availability. Like they had it in cartridge and in flower form, and I was like, yes. To both, just because I was curious about that. I've not noticed a huge difference as of right now. For some reason, I feel like I want to lean towards flower just because that's what I know. And that's the first I ever tried it where I had a day where I just had like a series of really tense meetings and had like muscle spasms happening just from tension. And a friend of mine like ground up some of the White Harmony and put it in his vaporizer and was like, here, try this. And that was when I noticed, like, it was like 30 minutes later, maybe not even. And I was like, oh my God, nothing hurts. Everything just relaxed. Like I almost started crying. But that was flower. So I think I tend to lean towards flower just because in my mind, I think psychologically I'm like, oh, it's not as tainted or whatever, which is stupid. Like it isn't necessarily true. But the cartridge I've noticed like for sleep and for stuff like that, it works just as well from what I can tell.
Okay.
So I don't really have a preferred between the two, but I guess if I had to pick, I'd probably say flower, but I think it's more psychological than it is anything else.
And you've already sort of touched on this a little bit, but what is it that makes you decide to smoke or vape or eat at a certain point? You've mentioned already, having like a stressful day. Are there other things that factor into that?
At this point, I think it's more about the symptoms and recognizing what I think I need, because I work on computers all day, so I have neck and shoulder issues all the time with muscles, and depending on what I have in the house in terms of strain, I feel like I'll kind of take that into account and be like, oh, well, this particular strain that I have right now, I know is just killer for muscle aches or whatever. And so there are days where I'll be like, I can't wait to sign off work because I want to have some of this, because I know that it will make me feel really awesome, like it did last night. And like, I've been hurting all day and I really want that relief. So it kind of goes depending on what's happening in the day and like what symptom wise I'm having going on, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And you're in a unique position because you obviously have had and currently have this, the medical issue that this helps with. So, how, I guess, how did that help you? I don't know how much detail you want to go into, but how did cannabis help you? And what were the symptoms that you were dealing with that it helped with?
Oh my God.
That was a terrible question. I worded that stupid.
I totally understand what you're saying, though. When I was diagnosed with breast cancer, one of the first things I said was, what is the hospital's stance on medical marijuana? Like, that was like one of my first questions right off the bat. And luckily my oncologist was down with it. And oh my God, I mean, the nausea was a big one. There were days I literally wouldn't have eaten as a cancer patient had I not had medical marijuana. So that was huge. But
that was because of the chemotherapy?
Yeah. And radiation, really. But then I had a port installed, and plus, that like the side that is affected by treatment, you tend to kind of favor that side of your body. So like muscle wise, I was just all out of whack. And I knew I was given some anti-nausea medication, but like some of the side effects of that weren't super great. Like some of the side effects were like constipation or headaches or what. And I'm like, well, I don't really want any of that. If the whole point is to like take this medicine to help me to eat normal and have my system functioning normal. Plus, there were so many unknowns happening already that I just wanted something that I knew would give me relief that I was at least expecting, or at least symptoms that I was expecting, but also ward off some of that other stuff. And I kind of already knew what weed would do. So I was really comfortable in that regard, using that as my relief mechanism. And I was not aware that the medical stuff has come a long way from just, your buddy who can get you something in high school. Yeah. So it's way better and it's way more specialized. And it was a lifesaver at times because, between anxiety and then not being able to eat just because you physically don't feel well, we'd kind of conquered both of those things for me. So that was really helpful. I'm a huge proponent of that and have actually told a few, not so fortunately, I've had some friends who've also been diagnosed with breast cancer since I was, and I've said to all of them, look into medical marijuana for sure.
And did they?
I don't know. One of them did, because she also had some other medical stuff happening along with her situation, and found it helpful. Other friends that I was not aware sort of kind of came out of the woodwork and started talking about like, oh yeah, no, I love it. It's just that I haven't done this in years, or I didn't know where I could go to get reliable. How do you get reliable weed when you're like an adult in 2020? Stuff like that. Like a friend of mine had to have back surgery, and I had no idea that he not only would have been receptive, but was like, I actually could have used some help with certain symptoms that I had. So I brought him some edibles because I was like, well, these have high CBD in them. Here you go. Have fun. But yeah, it's crazy how once you start talking about it more and making it seem more normal, people kind of are like, oh yeah, no, they're more willing to talk about it and talk about how it's helped them in the past. And I think that needs to come out a little bit more so people realize like, oh, it's not just this weird like gateway drug, which sounds so stupid in the 80s.
Yeah.
Like that was like what they would say with like Dare and stuff like that. But it got kind of ingrained in our minds. And so, but I've had some friends definitely, since I've talked about it more, come forward and said, oh yeah, no, I find it really helpful, and so let me try this or whatever. And there's a lot more people that use out there, I think, than folks realize. So
yeah, the stigma of it is definitely lessening day by day, which is really good to see. I was watching some show, I think it was that show I'm Not Okay With This on Netflix, and there's this high school student, this guy who's just a big stoner, and he sells it and stuff, and it's an interesting show because they sort of make it feel like it's from the 80s, but I think it's current day, and he's in the car with a girl, and he lights up a joint, and she goes, oh, that's a gateway drug, and he's like, oh yeah, to what? And she's like, oh, well, to like heroin and meth and cocaine and death, and he's like, all right, and then he just keeps on smoking his joint. But I wanted to ask specifically about the medical strains and the CBD. We're not going to go into the details because I think enough people know, or anybody who's listening to this probably knows the differences. But what's your specific experience when you were going through that? What sort of strains did you get, THC versus CBD?
Mostly, well, it would depend. I would kind of rely on my dispensary to kind of give me their thoughts on different strains depending on what I kind of needed. But I've always had, because I also have played piano since I was younger, and I just, for some reason, my mom and I both have these shoulders that like, we have one side that just like tenses up immediately as soon as we start doing any sort of movement type stuff where we're like playing the piano, or if I'm playing guitar or ukulele, I just tend to tense up really bad on my neck. And so ever since I discovered, if you have higher CBD in the strain, it tends to help with muscle pain and relaxation. I've just been kind of zero focused on those strains for that reason, because like I said, it's sort of that Advil effect of like, this is so awesome and useful that like I don't want to go without having this in the house. But so those would always be like anything White Harmony-esque I'm always on the hunt for, but which does have a high CBD count. But it kind of varies. I kind of rely on my dispensary for what they have gotten in and what they suggest and what they know about the different strains to kind of judge what I want to get depending on what I'm looking for. So it's kind of touch and go, but I don't know if this is like scientifically true or not, but I have a friend who says that he thinks that the higher CBD strains really work better having THC involved. Like if it's all CBD, that doesn't seem to help, he seems to think. And which like White Harmony is a good like 1-to-1 where it's like half CBD, half THC. And so I tend to gravitate towards those strains a lot more just because of, I know overall that like I will always have use for those, it seems like. Right. But yeah, it kind of just depends.
Did you ever get any strains that were exclusively CBD? Did you ever try them? I've had
some where it's very low THC.
Okay. Did they seem to help?
I don't know. I don't know that they did as well with pain.
It's so interesting because it's so hard to, I mean, I'm sure that they did, but when you're so used to having that psychoactive side as well,
right?
How much of it is coming from that? Because pain is so mental anyway.
Right.
It's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. And I also, the theory that my friend also has is that it takes like a shitload of CBD to really, really help, which is why the THC he thinks kind of co-balances that and sort of works a little better if you have both. So I don't know. I could have had that in my mind and just been biased, but I swear that like having the balance of the two seems to work best for me at least. Yeah.
I know that there's a lot of strains out there that are 1-to-1, even edibles, it's a 1-to-1. All right. Well, I'm sure that sort of topic will come up again, but How do you think others would describe you when you're high? Has anybody actually just said that to you?
Munchy Mindy is the name that I got for a while, just because, like, long ago, before like any major health stuff popped up, just because it's a fact. It's something that I've tried to become more aware of as I've gotten older, just because, like, I have to have that realization of just because you're high doesn't necessarily mean that you really want a giant pizza right now, because you might have just eaten before you smoked and you might just have the munchies. Whereas, like, that wasn't always the case, like, know-how wise. But I feel like my mom seems to always know when I'm high, even though she doesn't. Because she always says that my eyes look funny, but to be fair, like, usually by the time I'm talking to her, I'm kind of tired and trying to battle, like, the overtaking of any sort of, like, exhaustion or I guess she probably won't hear this, but, like, trying to keep up with what she's saying.
Because it's probably later in the day.
Yeah.
Sometimes anyway, you're tired or something.
Absolutely, yeah. But other than that, no, not really, I don't think. I think most people, like, kind of, at least nickname-wise, I get even more giggly than I normally get. So, yeah, I lose track of trains of thought a lot more easily when I'm high, but I think everybody does. So those are, like, the main characteristics, I think.
Yeah. Let's see. That question, I like to ask it because it's kind of a weird question, but I guess I'm hoping someday that somebody will actually say, oh yeah, somebody actually did tell me what I was like when I was high, and it was just so enlightening, but nobody's ever said that. So I'll just keep on asking the question.
Gotcha. Yeah, no enlightening moments.
No. Let's see. So when you first, take an edible or vape a little bit, what are some of the first things that you start to feel, either physically or mentally?
Kind of that, like, creep of feeling happy or relaxed or better, for lack of a better phrase, I guess, or word. But I just start to notice that things, if I had anxiety or any sort of depression or anything that was, like, at a certain level, it's suddenly, like, come down a few levels. And that's, like, the first thing I notice, which is always really nice, because usually I remember specifically at an old job, I had an argument with a boss, and a friend of mine that was also a coworker was like, go home, smoke a little bit, like, calm down. And she suggested a particular show to put on, actually, too. And I
what show?
Eastbound and Down,
okay.
Which I've now seen all of. I hadn't seen at all at the time. But which that pilot, if you're high and you need to watch something and you have a sense of humor, that pilot, like, I almost wet my pants within the first, like, 5 minutes of that pilot. Just sober, but, like, high. It was insane. But yeah, I just noticed that I started to kind of giggle about little things before I even put the TV show on. And was like, okay, I'm starting to feel better, because I had been in this horrible mood and had this horrible fight with my boss and whatever, and then was starting to finally, like, feel like, oh, I'm giggling at, like, normal stuff. Okay, this is good. So that's usually the first thing I notice.
Yeah, I'm back to feeling normal now.
Yeah, totally. Not angry at everybody.
Right. And we don't want to feel that way. So in a very general sense, because we're going to get into some details, what does it feel like to be high?
I almost said, I like to browse through catalogs of farming equipment. God, I don't know how to describe how I feel when I'm high. Happy, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, that's a perfectly fine answer too.
Yeah, I'd say happy overall. That's when you know things are going right and things are good.
Yeah. And I think that in and of itself, I mean, that one word answer is just, that's a perfect soundbite for this plant in general.
Yeah.
It just makes people feel better. It has the potential to make you feel worse, for sure, just like anything. But that's why this thing has stuck around. That's why people use this every day for mental health or physical health or whatever it is. It just makes people feel good and happy.
Right. And there's also the idea that, like, I know sometimes it can make, if things go badly, you might think that you're dying, but you're not going to die from an overdose of marijuana.
No.
Like, that's just not going to happen. So there's always that in the back of your mind, I feel like, that helps people kind of be like, okay, this is chill. This is nice.
Yeah, there's this chart that I've seen, go around social media a little bit, and it's a list of things, and it's like, guns have killed this many people per year, and heart disease kills this many people per year, and at the bottom of the list, there's like peanuts kill 3 people per year, marijuana kills 0 people per year, and then at the very bottom, the caption is something like, marijuana is safer than peanuts.
That's awesome.
Which when you're looking at it from the statistical standpoint, yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
Because nobody's ever died from it.
I just remember there was a Jim Brewer routine, and I'm not like a huge Jim Brewer fan by any means, but he was on some comedy show, and he was like, you just see people drunk, and they're like, whatever, I'm going to kick your ass, buddy. And then you see somebody high, and they're like, you're lucky I'm sitting down, man. And it's kind of true. Like, that's the other thing, is you don't really hear about people going on like marijuana-fueled binges and like beating up a bunch of people or looting or doing violent shit.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of chill and peaceful, and that's really, really nice. And what I like about it as well, I like to just put on like some show or a movie or something that's really thought provoking. I can't talk. And kind of sit back and just let my brain go nuts.
Yeah, that reminded me of there's that classic scene from that old movie Reefer Madness where they get somebody high, they're doing the experiments or something, and he just gets all crazy. Actually, I wonder if this was, maybe I'm thinking of the scene from Pineapple Express where they sort of, it's a throwback to that stuff, but I feel like they even had it in Reefer Madness as well. But the whole point is that this guy gets super violent and crazy when he's high, and it's like, that's just not, it's just so false.
Yeah. I'm sure there might be like one guy somewhere where that's the reaction he has, but it's one guy
maybe.
Probably.
Right. But he didn't die.
Right.
So how does your level of focus change when you get high?
Well, as a rule, I don't really do a whole lot of stuff that requires focus when I get high, just because like I wouldn't trust myself to work or anything like that, like, do my day job. But it really, again, kind of depends. I've noticed that like I've gotten high and gone to play my piano and then spent 20 minutes looking through sheet music and then been like unaware of it completely. And then come to and been like, oh my God, I turned my piano, because I have an electric keyboard right now. So I'd be like, oh, I turned it on and didn't do anything for like 20 minutes because I was looking through all of this music. So I was just like really interested in everything I was finding in my, music collection of sheet music or like my bookmarks that I have saved for different spots online. And so I think it makes me somewhat easily distracted in a way, but in a focused sense, if that makes any sense at all. Like, I'll be on a mission, to find a piece to practice or a movie to watch or something like that, but then get caught up in like all of the collections that I have and thinking about like, what do these movies say about film, or like, like just random stuff like that I'm like, okay, this was not my goal to begin with, but this is what it's become. So there we are.
That I feel like has come up a few times before, and it's kind of like,
oh, really?
I'm gonna see if I can phrase it the way that I just had it in my head. It's like doing something very focused, but in a very unfocused way.
Yeah.
Like you said, you're looking for the piano music. You're doing that one thing that's very focused. You're not getting distracted by other things, but you're going about it very unfocusedly. And maybe not. Maybe you're actually doing it very focused, but you're almost doing it too focused.
Right.
Where you're looking at all the different things, all the different pieces that you could be playing instead of just choosing one.
Yep, absolutely. Oh, there's my Little Mermaid book from when I was like in 5th grade. And it I could still play A Beautiful World. Maybe I should play that one. And then it's just like a big steamroll as you go through everything.
Right, right.
Not that I've had that conversation with myself. I've totally had that conversation with myself.
Well, so that one sort of ties into the next question, which is, what's your sense of time like?
Oh, yeah. Well, skewed, I think is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I'll be like, oh, I've been doing this for like an hour and it's been 15 minutes. Or I'll be like the exact opposite, oh, it's been just like 20 minutes since I've been playing this game and it's been 2 hours. So it really depends.
Can you pinpoint what things will skew it one direction or the other? Or does it feel sort of random? It
kind of feels random, at least to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also probably something that you haven't thought of until I asked you the question.
Not at all. No. But now I will, for sure.
So you feel both ways. You'll feel sometimes time speeds up, but sometimes time slows down depending on what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Because some people are one or the other, but every once in a while, I'll talk to somebody who's both, which I think is interesting. It's so interesting how people are different that way.
And I think it has to do a lot with what the activity is, too.
Right.
But yeah, I've definitely gone in both directions for sure.
Well, your homework then is to do different activities and then write down, okay, time felt slower when I did this thing, but time went faster when I did this other thing. And you can give me your results.
Okay, sounds good.
Great. So what about creativity? Do you feel more creative? Do you do creative things when high?
Again, it kind of depends on what it is. I always have my ukulele around because I like to just kind of strum on it absentmindedly, even if I have to, like sober or high. And I feel like I always sort of grab for that when I'm high regardless. But sometimes it kind of just depends on the mood I'm in, because sometimes I'm really more in the mood to be entertained, in which case I feel like maybe, being high helps me notice a few things about what it is that I'm viewing or watching or experiencing that I wouldn't otherwise notice. But also it could mean that I'm doing something that's creative. Mm-hmm. Although, like I said, like in recent years, I've tried not to really be high when having to do something where I have to interact with other people, especially when it's somewhat work related or related in a way that will, that will affect others in a much bigger sense. So I don't know that I have as much experience being high and producing anything creative that's not like for myself only. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure I will add that to my list for homework.
Okay,
because
good.
I'm sure that I've done stuff like that and just not really thought about it before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you do just pick up the ukulele to just strum, do you feel like you're doing different things when you're high opposed to when you're sober with that? Or playing the piano, for instance?
No. I think that maybe might speak more to my inability to not be able to sit still. Mm-hmm. But no, it's more, it's always sort of, music has always been sort of more for me anyway, the way I tend to play. And so it's more of like a soothing thing, or like I was working on this particular chord progression, or I'm in a mode right now where I'm teaching myself something and I want to keep practicing it, and it's sort of a secondhand response, if that makes mm-hmm. sense. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about music, because assuming that you like to listen to music as well in
yes.
addition to play it, how does your experience of listening to music change when you get high?
I definitely get more excited and more enthusiastic, I think, when I'm high. Probably to the annoyance of other people around me sometimes, but I do just like the moments in certain songs, say, that really excite me when I'm sober, when I'm high, kind of get heightened, and I just sometimes like nerd out over certain sections or certain pieces or whatever. So I guess my again, like my level of joy overall that I get, like the amount of joy that I get from what I'm listening to gets heightened mm-hmm. when I'm high, I notice.
And then on like a mental sense, are you listening to the music in a different way? Do you listen to the lyrics in a different way? Or have you noticed? I've
not noticed, honestly, like specifically. I think it's just one big package. Right. For me, I'll notice like musically stuff, but then lyrically as well. So it kind of goes both ways.
In general, it sounds like you're just happier about the music that you're listening to.
Yeah, in general, yeah.
And that is not a bad thing.
No, I agree. I enjoy it. I don't know.
Yeah. I think you sort of touched on this before, but what about your memory when you get high?
Well, I do have short-term memory loss. Well, it's hard because I have chemo brain issues and like, your short-term memory pot issues. But other people would probably say otherwise, but I know that like my memory in general kind of is what it is, and I don't really notice when I'm in the moment and I'm high in the moment. I don't notice much of a difference from when I'm sober, if it's something that I'm kind of iffy on memory wise anyway. I might obviously have short-term memory issues like while I'm high a little bit more so than when I'm sober, but I'm thinking of trying to, because you're right, I never pay attention to this stuff when I'm high necessarily. So now I'm trying to think about it, and I'm like, I don't know actually. But yeah, I'm able to lose track a lot easier of a train of thought when I'm high, obviously, but than when sober. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's pretty standard. So basically, you've got some memory issues anyway, but they might be a little bit heightened when you get high.
Yeah.
So we are going to end part 1 of Mindy's interview there. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Mindy. Make sure to check out next week's episode, which will be part 2 of her interview. Please rate and review, subscribe, share. Feel free to contact me. Feel free to join the Patreon to help me pay for hosting services and whatever. You can get our episodes early. There might be some exclusives coming. And again, thank you very much. Again, still no sign off officially. If you have a suggestion for a good tag to put at the end of the episodes, I'm not so clever. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks.